Hi, I'm Tim, and welcome to Watch You Want. Thanks for logging on. Today we are looking at the quintessential engineer's watch, part of a generation of watches that were developed during the mid-1950s to deal with the new era of big science, high technology, and workplaces that could be hazardous to the health of your watch. The Milgauss was originally designed for people who would be in the presence of high magnetic flux densities. Now, what does this mean? Well, in 1956, the idea was if you were an engineer, if you were a worker in the electrical industry or the burgeoning nuclear power sector, if you were working in new Department of Defense sectors that involved the growing computer phenomenon, yes, computers, back when they were the size of houses, produced quite the electrical flux. But the thing about the Milgauss was, from the very beginning, it harnessed time-tested methodology to defeat magnetic field densities, and it's endured for that reason into an era when, surprise, surprise, almost all of us deal with those kind of hazards on a daily basis. Whether you're dealing with subwoofers in premium speaker systems, whether you work in an office with a lot of computers, whether you work in an environment where large wiring looms produce high magnetic flux densities by virtue of high electrical currents, the Milgauss has arguably never been more relevant, not just to professionals, but to the way regular people live their lives. From 1956 to the present, this watch has endured as not just the engineer's watch in the Rolex lineup, but arguably the most versatile style in the Oyster case slash sports watch slash professional Rolex lineup. And a big reason for that is symmetry and simplicity. So 2007 comes along, Rolex debuts the third generation Milgauss. That's right, since 56, unlike the Submariners, unlike the GMTs, unlike the Datejusts, there have only ever been three distinct Rolex Milgauss generations. And this one right here is by far the most contemporary, the most refined, and the most versatile because it trades on its ability to, I would say, balance priorities. It has that anti-magnetic resistance, and to a degree that none of its predecessors did, and I'll get into the technology in a second. But what it also has is a dress watch-like simplicity that you'll never find on any of the rotating bezel Rolex Oyster models. Let me just go into what that means. It means that you've got this beautiful tumble-home polished bezel. You can see it great on my wrist here, and it essentially simplifies and expands the dial. When you're looking at something like a Submariner, which nominally is also a 40mm case, the dial's a little bit constrained by the sheer width of the bezel. It's also a bit marred by the asymmetry created by the Cyclops Eye magnifier at 3 o'clock. Having that date may be practical, but when you've only got a small disc to work with, that kind of asymmetry, that kind of blocky dissonance in the visage of the watch can upset the, shall I say, aesthetic purity of the piece. Practical, yes, maybe not the epitome of elegance, but with the Milgauss, you get that elegance, you get that refinement back. And because, again, you don't have the broad, readable bezel that has to display indexes or numerals or symbology, you get a bigger dial within the 40mm case. Also, because you don't have the Cyclops Eye and the date window itself, you wind up with an unmarred view from the side, from the profile, and total legibility of all the indexes themselves. So its essential function of telling time is completely uncompromised by the secondary function of giving you the date. Beautiful dress reference. This example, which features the famed lightning seconds hand, not a foudroyant, not that kind of lightning seconds hand, but a lightning bolt in orange, also features corresponding calibrations on the minute track with Arabic numerals in orange and orange luminova indexes. It's a very upbeat, sunny, cheerful look. Formal enough to go with formal dress, but lighthearted, unpretentious. It's a little bit of a wink and a nod from Rolex that yes, indeed, the Geneva giant does know how to have fun. And it's also true to history in a sense because Rolex originally equipped the Milgauss back in 1956 with this kind of quixotic little lightning bolt seconds hand. So even back then in the Ike era, Rolex had a little bit of a sense of humor. So lighten up, folks. If you've criticized the Milgauss for letting its hair down a bit, know this. Grandpa did the same. Beyond that dress formality and the versatility that this watch brings to the table, it's also a great Rolex for those with smaller wrists because you get that 40mm full-sized sports watch look and 100-meter water resistance. But on my wrist, which you can see is 6 1/3 inches, 16 centimeters for our metric friends at CERN, for instance, it is a Milgauss. The bottom line is it fits very flat, it stays low, it'll slide under a long sleeve or a dress cuff, and because you don't have that big blocky knurled bezel, it's not going to catch on sleeves the way those might. Has a great look to it, but again, it is a full-size watch with reassuring heft and solidity, so you don't have to compromise in durability. The watch's history is interesting because over time the Milgauss has become more anti-magnetic and more mechanically sophisticated. Today Rolex has 3 lines of defense against magnetism to prevent your watch from becoming magnetized and timing inaccurately. Now what they do, the first step is the most traditional. You see there's no date and there's a reason for that, and that's because Rolex wanted to encase the entire movement in a 3-dimensional shell within a case called a Faraday cage. It's made of soft iron, and what it does is it channels the magnetic field lines around the movement. Rather than allowing them to go straight through, it bends them around. It is a paramagnetic material so that they don't affect the hairspring directly. Rolex's second layer of defense, and this is where the innovations of the post-2007 Milgauss come into effect, Rolex's second layer of defense is the anachronous nickel escapement. So the lever, the pallet, the escape wheel itself, that little toothed wheel that's interacting with the fork, the pallet fork, it's made of a material that is anti-magnetic in its own right, so that it will not become magnetized or susceptible to deviation in the presence of a magnet. And the final layer of defense is Rolex's signature parachrom blue handmade Breguet overcoil hairspring. It's dramatically more shock resistant, dramatically more temperature resistant, and dramatically more anti-magnetic than a conventional Nivarox hairspring, for instance. And again, it is handmade, demonstrating Rolex's true manufacturer competence to build every part of the watch, from the bracelet to the clasp, to the case, to the dial, the hands, the movement, and the pieces of the movement. That's the kind of savoir-faire you get from Rolex. So this watch is not just a great reference that can kind of pull double duty in a suit or a bathing suit. It's also a remarkable piece of technological history, a document of the development of kind of 20th century lifestyles as we saw the advent of high technology industries, and then we saw technology move into our daily lives. The Milgauss has been a constant through that, and a great companion that has never been more relevant than it is now. And with this sunny combination of white metal, a white dial, orange indexes, hands, and calibrations, you've really got a unique look that, quite frankly, is outstanding within the Rolex catalog. If you like what Rolex is about, but you don't want to be just another guy with a Submariner, a GMT, or a Daytona, consider the Milgauss, and specifically consider this variant here, available with full boxes, papers, and factory accessories from Watch You Want.